This study claims a daily multivitamin improves memory in older adults. It's the kind of simple, cheap intervention we all want to be true. But the closer we looked at how this trial was built, the more the foundation started to crack. The meter is empty. Let's audit the framework. We aren't here to give medical advice. We are here to audit the forensic integrity of the data so you know if it's actually trustworthy. If you want to test a supplement, you need to prove the setup was fair from the start. The paper states a computer-generated permuted block approach, blinded to study investigators, was used to assign participants. A computer generated the assignments, and the researchers were locked out of the sequence. Both sides were kept blind exactly as required. They even took the human element out of the testing itself, relying completely on a self-administered web platform to gather all the outcome data. Sealed envelopes, independent sequence, and double blinding. All clear. Once the groups are locked, we check if they started evenly matched. Baseline demographic characteristics were similar between the randomly assigned multivitamin and placebo groups. The baseline stats show the groups started evenly matched. We also ran a mathematical consistency check across the entire paper, and the total patient numbers aligned perfectly from the abstract down to the final tables. Baseline balance and internal consistency check out. With the participants tracked, we look at how the math was handled. Linear mixed effects models tested for differences between treatment groups and changes in the primary outcome. The study defined its primary outcome clearly before starting a massive plus. They used a robust model for the longitudinal data, which appropriately handles missing measurements over the 3 years without skewing the curve. Appropriate statistical models and consistent endpoints. No issues here. We typically run a battery of arithmetic checks here to spot anomalies. The total sample size was 3,562 participants. With thousands of patients, standard consistency checks like the Grimm and Carlisle tests aren't mathematically applicable, and the bounded memory scores don't span the magnitudes needed for Benford's law. These advanced math checks are skipped, less damaging than the gaps ahead. So the math is clean, but we still need to see if they manipulated how it's displayed. Figure 4 shows the primary outcome data. The visual curves look sound, and the charts are plotted fairly with clear confidence intervals. And when we pull the actual test statistics from their data tables, the distribution of significance across the endpoints is entirely natural, with no signs of manipulation. Chart integrity and p-value distributions are completely solid. This is where the pristine narrative starts to crack. An intention-to-treat analysis included randomly assigned participants who had a baseline plus at least one follow-up measurement. They held on to most of their participants and ran a modified analysis to account for dropouts. But they never actually calculated how many people they needed to prove their case before starting. Without an a priori power calculation, they risk finding a false positive simply by running the trial until they hit significance. They admit their timing was constrained by the parent trial, prioritizing convenience over a dedicated statistical plan that would ensure true scientific validity. A power calculation, not a word on it. If you're finding this analysis valuable, consider subscribing so you don't miss our bite-sized breakdowns. And that lack of upfront planning bled into the publication itself. The trial was officially registered online, but the registry number indicates it was filed years after enrollment began. The abstract extrapolates a microscopic improvement into 3 years of memory change, obscuring the clinical reality. And if you want to check their data yourself, they essentially require you to include one of their investigators as a co-author, a major barrier to true open science. Retrospective registration and restricted data. The transparency story gets complicated. Which brings us to the financial disclosures. The work was supported by an investigator-initiated grant from Mars Edge. This was published in a highly reputable, top-tier journal, but the trial was directly funded by the company that makes the supplements. The author stated the sponsor had no role in the analysis, and they did disclose the relationship in the fine print. But industry money fundamentally changes the incentives of a trial, even when the paperwork is filed correctly. They insist the sponsor had zero influence over the findings, but the financial connection remains deeply embedded in how this trial was executed. The funding independence is compromised, not fully objective. 81 out of 100. This is a massive, methodologically rigorous trial that proves its results with clean math. But the microscopic real-world benefit is spun into a major marketing claim, backed by the company selling the pills, with no upfront statistical plan to keep them honest. It's safe to consume, but don't expect it to rewind the clock on your brain.